What are you absolutely 100 sure you saw, but have no proof? Story 1. I saw a lady I worked with sneak into the walk-in cooler where I worked, so I opened the door for fun, and I'll never forget this. She had just wanted to take a bite of hard-boiled egg, but when she saw me, she pushed the whole egg in her mouth and swallowed it whole. Then she said hi and acted like nothing happened. I still can hardly believe it. Story 2. In the summer sometime around 2005, in a suburb of Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia, a friend and I were driving on a small two-lane road with trees on either side. We saw a monkey drop from the trees and jump to the other side of the road. It then jumped and grabbed a low-hanging branch and swung back into the trees. I couldn't believe it, and my friend was as equally shocked. Story 3. The coolest shooting star ever. It lasted a very long time, like a solid 8 to 10 seconds. It looked like it was spraying sparkles out behind it, and the trail changed colors a few times from red to green to purple, etc. Seen dozens of shooting stars. Never seen one remotely like that. Story 4. I'm pretty sure I rang up John C. Riley in my old bookstore job once. This was in Illinois, and he was buying a few CDs. He was wearing sunglasses the whole time and was definitely being low-key. I didn't want to just straight up ask him if he was JCR, but I wanted to say something because I really like him. So I was like, hey, has anyone ever told you you look like someone famous? And he was quickly like, nope, and went on his way. I'm positive it was him, but none of my other co-workers even noticed him, so no one believed me. Story 5. I witnessed a squirrel actually tipping up a presumably empty discarded can of 7-Up, using its 2 front paws like it was drinking it. This was on the front lawn of my kids' HS shortly after lunch. It happened, really. Story 6. I'd been hit by my husband. I was terrified to leave him. I was driving alone at night and asked out loud, will I be happy if I leave him? As soon as I said that, a bright white object streaked across the sky. I've seen falling stars. This was likely a meteorite or something. It popped into existence out of seemingly nowhere, arced across the sky, then disappeared. I had to pull over to the shoulder of the deserted road. Are you kidding me? I said out loud. I looked up online to see if anyone saw anything, but I couldn't find any mention of a meteor shower or anything. I don't know the date this happened. I left him within weeks of this event, and it was the most terrifyingly brave and best thing I've ever done. I am happy now, in love, and I love myself. I used to work at a haunted house as one of the actors. I actually hate acting, and at the time hated haunted houses, but my friend wanted to do it, but didn't have the courage to do the process alone. Being the good friend I am, I signed up too. One night, I had to work a whole section by myself. I had to sit by myself in dim lighting for hours on end with horror music playing to create ambience. There were a bunch of mannequins sitting in chairs, and I would sit among them to jump scare the passersby. One night, there was a 30-minute lag where nobody came through. So imagine sitting in pure, eerie darkness by yourself for that long. I have absolutely no proof that this happened at all, but as I was sitting among the mannequins, one of them turned their head to look back at me, then turned its head back to the original position. We could fairly argue that I was paranoid and made this up out of such paranoia, but that felt real as all to me. I had to leave the set and go to the break room for a while. I saw something else peculiar in a different room a few days later. I feel like that space had bad energy, and am happy to say I won't be working there ever again. Story 7 was playing outside with my older brother and saw him dash across the street. I was about to do the same until someone snatched me by shirt and a large white Chevy van blew by in front of me. My big brother had never crossed the street, and it was him holding me by the shirt. Story 8. At a late-night party in the M.T. Adams neighborhood of Cincinnati, walked out on the balcony and witnessed the brilliant light of what appeared to be a meteor space debris burning out over the downtown area. It lit up the skyline for a brief second and then flamed out. Someone then came out and joined me, and I said, did you see that? They said, what? I told them what I saw, and they said, sure you did, dude. No mention in the news the next day. Story 9. I was watching the ISS live stream late one night. About 8 years ago, it soothed my bedtime anxiety, just looking at the big old world and feeling small and tranquil. And this object came into view of the camera, sort of shaped like an arrowhead or a 3-sided long pyramid, toppled over, started small and far from the camera's view. I assumed it was space debris or a fancy satellite, but it just kept getting closer, and this thing was huge, tons of square edge ridges on it, curved indents in symmetrical patterns. More and more detail. It looked enormous, and it just kept coming closer and seeming bigger, but it was still so far away from the ISS camera. I can't really express the size of it, so I put in a stream chat, what is that thing? A few seconds later, the feed cut to static. God, do I wish ID press print screen. Story 10. I saw a man in a chicken costume on the London Underground get on the train, do a backflip, just to casually walk out of the train again at the same stop like nothing happened. Story 11. I saw a penguin in California a few hours from SF. I was walking around in the middle of the day with a friend, and we see it near the beach. Poor thing shaking and just standing there. I called animal control, and they didn't believe me. They kept saying, "Are you sure it's a penguin? And is this some kind of prank?" After a few minutes on the phone with them, I was like, "Yeah, I'm standing 5 feet away from it. It's definitely a penguin." Story 12, a jaguarundi in my small town in Westish, Texas. I was maybe 11 and walking home from the park through a trail in the woods and past a little neighborhood pond. It was a drought year, so there was like no water anywhere, but this pond was always full, probably a spring, come to think of it. I came around a bend and startled this weird tan cat having a drink. I thought it was a mountain lion at first, but it was really small, think bobcat or Maine Coon, and had the silliest little ears and an extra long tail. I remember laughing about its weird little ears the whole way home. I told my mom I saw a mountain lion with teeny ears, and she scolded me for lying. I was so pissed and just kind of ignored it until years later when I saw one at a zoo. IT was the mystery cat 100 jaguarundi, which I now know live in Texas. I wish my mom had asked more questions so we could have reported it to whatever wildlife experts would have wanted to know it's there. Since they haven't been seen in Texas since '86 supposedly, the habitat makes sense too, because it's like the thorniest, scrubbiest underbrush in the world. Someone had to cut a path to make it easier to walk to the park, but it was basically impenetrable juniper and mesquite on either side. Story 13-1981, Grand Forks, AFB, North Dakota. My memory's foggy, so excuse weirdness in the details. And walking across the athletic field and retreat followed by the national anthem is played 4 or 430. I don't remember it's done every day, so we're ordered, I stop and stand at attention with hand on heart. North Dakota is swarming with prairie dogs, and this field was no exception. Anyway, I become aware that a prairie dog has emerged from its burrow and is standing next to me, close enough to touch. I have no explanation and no satisfying theories for what happened next. The little guy stands at attention and puts his paw on his chest. We stood there for a minute or so until the music stopped. When it did, he looked directly at me, gave a cheery chirp, and dived into his burrow. Thanks for the question. OP, I haven't thought about this in years. It's still probably the most adorable, weird thing I've ever witnessed. Oh, P.S. I checked, but never him again. Story 14 mid-aughts, small blurb in the local paper, sidebar column, credit AP Newswire, about a confirmed and reproduced experiment at UC Berkeley, I believe in conjunction with DARPA, which exhibited cold fusion. It was described as being a very small-scale interaction which produced only a tiny amount of energy and was said to have potential applications in cell phone technology and homeland security. I don't know if my friends played a prank and got a dummy copy of the news printed up or what, but I've never been able to track it down or anything even close. But I read it. Story 15, when I was 11, I spent the night with a friend whose grandpa worked at the zoo. The next morning, we went with him to his early morning shift at the zoo, and I got to kind of run around the zoo before anything was open and the animals are just kind of waking up. We were behind the rhinoceros habitat, and we were looking through these knotholes in the fence, kind of spying on the rhinoceros for some reason. There was a really big log in their habitat, and the big male rhino ran up to the log and jumped up so that his 2 front feet were on the log. And then another rhino started making weird noises at him, like cheering him on, and he started rolling that log while his 2 front feet were still on it and walking on his back feet. It was like a circus trick or something, but they were acting that way by themselves. That is the only time in my life I've ever spied on a rhino, and it really paid off. Story 16, a week after my dad died, I saw him sitting in his chair in the day, smiling at me. I was so happy to see him, but I don't know if I hallucinated him due to emotional stress and grief, or it was real. About 6 months later, I felt his presence and asked him to turn on a light, which it did straight away. Maybe there was a reason, but it just felt so strange like he was there. Never been afraid of death since. Story 17, when I was a kid, I went outside to call my brother home. He was already running like mad across the road towards home, and above him was a circular display of lights. They disappeared quickly. I don't believe in aliens and UFOs and all that, but it definitely happened, and I can't explain it. Story 18, driving down the road at 1-ish, am at night, middle of the road, see a whitish-grayish figure jump down from gum tree branch way high up, 10 to 12 meters. No way a normal person could do that. And then it ran across the road and disappeared. Freaking yoes, they are real. Story 19, I grew up in the north of the UK, and there were 3 big coal-fired power stations along the river that flowed through my town. The nearest was probably about 3 miles away, and it was visible from most of the town as it's a very flat area. I was in a local park drinking with my buddy at about 1 a.m., as we'd done many times, and suddenly there was a huge bright light from the direction of the power station. It was a bluey artificial light, but literally turning half the sky to day. We looked over at the source, and it was from behind the power station, which was inexplicably way closer than it should be, like only a few hundred yards away, towering over the park and backlit with this crazy bright light. It was so close, I remember tilting my head back to look up at the main chimneys. Neither myself or my buddy were fazed by it at the time, though. It sounds weird, but it somehow just seemed normal. The light faded after about 10 seconds, and when our eyes adjusted, everything was back to how it usually is, the red navigation lights on top of the station towers twinkling in the distance. We didn't even chat about it that night other than casually mention a light, drink a bit more and go home. Again, it seemed perfectly normal, but the next day we were both like, dude, what the AF happened last night ID? Get weird goosebumps just thinking about it for months afterwards. I've never seen anything like that before or since. Story 20, me and my cousin were looking out the window together on a bright, hot summer day, and we saw yellow lightning just randomly hit the middle of the street. The skies were clear, I don't remember how clear, but definitely no storm clouds or anything. And yeah, I know all lightning is white, but sometimes it has that blue-violet tint around it. This one was yellow. Story 21, UFO. Many of us did. It was THR late 90. My sister and neighbor still remembers it. We didn't make out the shape, but it was spinning many colors and moved on a Z-axis. Story 22, when my wife and I were dating, I spent the night at her apartment. I think she has made a comment about feeling presences there on occasion, but I didn't think much of it. We were about to go to bed. There was a 4 to 5 foot tall dresser next to the side of the bed I was getting on. There was a quarter on top of it, maybe an inch from the edge. We turn off the lights and lay in bed, and a few seconds later, we both hear what sounded like a coin hitting. Then the floor, a little freaked out, we get up and turn the lights on. That quarter was on the floor. But to duplicate the sound it made, it had to have bounced off the bed frame, which was like 2 feet from the dresser. That means that coin, which was well on top of the dresser, flew off the top shelf far enough to hit the bed frame a couple feet away. Can't say what it was or wasn't. And maybe there was an earthly explanation, but if I know what it is. Story 23, I was about 7 or 8, and with one of my friends, we were both looking at the sky together one night, and the two of us swear over our lives we saw a shadow of Santa's sleigh and reindeer on the moon. Absolutely nobody believes us when we tell the story, even the people who were there as well. Story 24, a massive orange cloud appeared over the ocean at night at the Oregon coast. I was walking and stargazing when it happened. When I say massive, I mean it lit up the sky, and it was a few miles out on the sea. I think it was most likely a gas tanker ship explosion, but despite the sky being lit up, I couldn't find a report about it anywhere the next day or in the days following. It was astonishing in its intensity. Story 25, when I was a teenager, my friends and I snuck onto the roof of this huge building that looks like the Taj Mahal, called the Haji Shrine. We used to do this thing where we would all tell our parents we were staying at the others' houses, and would go camp out in weird places and get into trouble. Anyways, we climbed down off the roof to go do whatever, and as we were coming around the corner of the building, we heard this enormous whooshing sound, like someone swinging a huge broom really fast. When we came around to the other side, we saw what looked like a bat with a 6-foot wingspan flapping around one of the light poles in the parking lot. We just stood there in awe watching until it flew away into the night about 10 seconds later. I always assumed it was an owl that was obscured by the bright light. We could really only see its silhouette, but it turned and performed maneuvers that looked very bat-like. Absolutely insane to think about a bat that big. Story 26, mild. As but a friend, I were on a smoke ride. Absolutely clear night. We're driving listening to Nas. As soon as Nas said, "Enter the fog, dog," we drove right through a car length patch of fog. Story 27, I saw a rare Mongolian wolf while I was on a trek, and no one believed me, not even the guides. I was coming over a hill, and it was right in front of me, then ran off, still pissed that no one believed me. Story 28, I'm pretty sure it was August of 2021 when this happened, but I was driving interstate to Texas and pulled over to a gas station to go to the bathroom, and for some snacks. I went to the bathroom, and there was some sort of organ in the urinal. I barely saw it, because I jumped immediately, but I'm almost positive either it was a human stomach or liver. I ran outside and just pissed on the ground behind the gas station. Story 29, I once saw a UFO flying over my backyard while I was drunk, but none of my friends believed me because they were too busy drinking beer and playing cornhole. Story 30, not long before an overseas flight, I couldn't find my passport anywhere. Usually kept it in a very small box with other important documents. Birth certificate, kid's passport. Vaguely remember my young son looking at my passport stamps months before. Figured it was stashed behind a sofa or something, so tore the whole house apart looking for it. Partner helped. He also checked the document box. It was just nowhere. Then I remembered the St. Anthony prayer, a story ID read on Reddit that people claimed worked when you've lost objects, so I said it aloud 3 times. St. Anthony, please come around, my passport needs to be found. When to sleep, prepare to try and get an emergency passport next morning. Well, hey, race the thing. I dreamt about the prayer and the documents box over and over all night. So when I woke up, I went straight to the box, which you needed a chair to reach, and was kept high enough my son couldn't access. And there was my passport. Absolutely cannot explain this. There's no logical explanation, but when I've told someone before, they said, but it must have been in there, and 100% was not in the box. My partner was probably more freaked out than me. It was also sitting right where it should have been all along with the 10 or so other things in there. It definitely wouldn't have been missed. Weirdest thing that has ever happened to me. Story 31. One day, when I was like 12, I used to sleep in the same bed as my mom. We stayed in a one-bedroom, and the bedroom was right next to the bathroom. One night out of nowhere, I just woke up. In complete darkness, I just looked at the ceiling, and then something just made me feel weird, and I turned on my side and looked toward the bathroom, and I saw an old lady in like a nightgown with a fat little boy right next to her by the bathroom. I just got goosebumps on my dead family writing this. I gave a horrified screech. Yelp, it WTF to call it. It was so horror-filled. I closed my eyes and just laid there until I fell asleep again. I have no proof, but I know what I saw. Story 32. While walking through the parking lot from my office to my car one summer afternoon, I had this sudden vision that I was looking down from a height of several hundred yards over the parking lot and looking around the area from above. I could see myself walking toward my car. I saw cars driving down the surrounding roads, and I could see people walking through the parking lots of surrounding businesses and stores. Then the vision went away as I continued to walk to my car. It kind of shook me. So I looked around and saw the same people and cars I saw from above that I could see within my field of view. This has happened twice in 2 different locations. Story 33. Dark, almost moonless night, in back paddock with neighbor, trying to find a ewe that had abandoned its newly born lamb. Neighbor suddenly lifts rifle and shoots at fox running straight towards us. This farmer had never missed in the 10 or so years we had known each other. Imagine my astonishment when the fox continued toward us. Imagine my even bigger astonishment as it seemed to split in half, and 2 foxes ran either side of where we were standing. The things had been running side by side with only one eye open each. Bullet went straight through the tiny gap between their 2 heads. Story 34. My husband died suddenly in 2016. I woke one night, and he was sitting on the foot of our bed watching me. I wasn't afraid, and he looked peaceful. He faded after a while and was gone. We had been together 46 years. Yes, I believe in spirits, and I think he was letting me know it was okay. Don't care what naysayers claim. Story 35. A VHS of a Scooby-Doo movie 2002. There was a scene where a topless waitress is walking in the background. I tried downloading the movie, but could not find the scene. Maybe it was a VHS-only thing. Story 36. A man walking a piglet down the street in my neighborhood. My sister said it might have been a wiener dog, but we used to live on a pig farm, so I know it was a piglet. They aren't allowed by city ordinance, so it was really strange, and I haven't seen the man or the piglet since. Story 37. I've told this story before on Reddit in a remote part of northern West Australia. I've seen about 4 times the size of the largest known flight able tearing into a kangaroo on the highway. We came around a hill and slammed on the brakes, and it took off into the sky. Wingspan easily longer than our car. Story 38. When I was around 7 or 8, my mom picked me up from school because it was raining heavily. On our way home, we passed a park that I always took a shortcut through on my way home. I was looking down playing my Game Boy when a huge crack of thunder scared me. I jumped and looked out the window and saw a white horse bolting through the trees in the park, right in the middle of town. I told my mom to look at the horse, but when I looked at her and looked back, I couldn't see the horse anymore. Ever since then, I've had a big soft spot for white horses, but none that I've ever seen have even come close to being as beautiful as the one in the park. Story 39. I didn't see, but I felt someone brush past me at a running speed when I went to Port Arthur in Tasmania. My partner wasn't standing next to me, nor were the other clients. It also wasn't remotely windy that night. Still sends shivers down my spine. Story 40. A ghost. I was in middle school. We were pulling stuff out of an abandoned auditorium the school used as a storage shed. She was standing in front of the stage. She was clearly Native American, young, maybe in her 20s. She was clear as day, standing 10 feet in front of me and pissed. She opened her mouth as if to scream, but nothing came out. She came walking towards us with this horrible grimace and limp, as if she were dragging her leg. We booked it. There were 3 of us who saw her, but no one believed us. I got detention for spreading rumors. They've torn the building down now. Story 41. The wake of something big moving along just under the surface, either a large whale or a submarine. It was creating a sort of bow wave like a boat, but nothing broke the surface that I could see. Don't think it was a whale because it would have eventually surfaced for air, and I kept looking for a long time. Whales don't usually just swim along at near surface depth without coming up for a breath every so often. But a submarine also makes little sense for that area. It was close to shore and heading toward a narrow and shallow sound where a sub would have had a surface for safety. Otto, beyond that sound, is a semi-secret NATO installation that someone might wish to spy on. Story 42, whilst heading home on a late-night flight working as cabin crew. I went in the flight deck because all the passengers were sleeping and we saw St. Elmo's fire on the nose of the aircraft. Captain said it was really rare because it's usually associated with volcanic ash. One of the coolest things I've seen. Story 43, at around 1 a.m., around 1998, I saw a large 15M-ish 50 feet soundless circular aircraft hovering still and shining a large spotlight on the grain silos next to my house. It looked like a top hat. It was just a bit higher than the equipment, so it was very visible. The window in my room was in full view of the entire thing, only a very small parking lot away in a rural area. It hovered there for a short time and flew away very quickly with no noise. Sometime later, within the same week, I saw silhouettes of very lanky and very tall too. 5-3M 8 to 10 feet bipedal things walking around that same structure at around the same time. No ship that time I could see. They had long arms, legs, and torso, and a normal-sized looking head. I could only see their silhouettes, and there was more than one. That's it. Nothing remarkable after that. Story 44, I was driving through the toll booths on the M2 motorway in Sydney, and a car came screaming up from behind me in the lane to my right, mounted the concrete barrier on 2 wheels, and did a barrel roll through the toll booth. Some of the booths were still manned back in the day, so if it was one of those, they had to have killed someone. I was in a state of shock since it was right at the booths. I knew someone would have been at the scene immediately, and there was all I could do, so I just kept driving. I never saw anything about it in the news, and I've never found anything on the internet since. When I came past the toll booths a few days later, there was no visible damage. It was like it never happened. Story 45, in the 90s, in an alley in Chicago. As I was coming home with a friend after a night out, we saw what looked like 2 tiny ostriches, but slightly off, walking together. We chased them, but they cut into a yard, and that was it. In hindsight, they were definitely baby emus, and I have no idea what they were doing in an inner-city Chicago neighborhood. Story 46, I believe there are sea monsters. I know that big animals can't survive under pressure, and that if there was a giant creature, we would have likely caught wind of its feeding patterns because it would have to eat bigger things than bottom-of-the-ocean creatures. I know, I don't care. The ocean is as inscrutable and unexplored as GD space, and maybe something adapted to the pressure or to limited resources for protein. Maybe a whole ecosystem of monsters are eating each other in a vast, undetected chasm. Who knows? I believe it mostly. Story 47, I was in rural Alaska in 2018 and was hopping off a riverboat and dragging it ashore. When I turned around, I swear I saw 3 5-foot-tall bald eagles standing a little farther down the shore. It terrified me because I didn't realize they could get that big and could totally kill me. The first thing I did when I got back to reception was look up the biggest birds, and supposedly they don't get that big, but I know what I saw. They weren't that far away, and there was some equipment next to them that put them to scale for me. No one believes me when I tell them. Story 48, after school, I used to have to walk through the city center so my dad could pick me up on his way home. One day, I walked past this homeless guy pestering passersby for a light. While I walked past them, I swear to God, I saw the homeless dude pull out a massive wad of cash while looking for a lighter. Story 49, 1987, while getting dressed for school, I saw a bunch of fruit on my underwear label that I recognized, but there was this bugle-looking thing that I didn't recognize. I asked my mom what it was, and she said that's a cornucopia. Story 50, at the time, I was absolutely sure I saw Alf outside the back door of my dad's repair shop. He said hi, waved, and then disappeared. It was a hot summer day, and I'm pretty sure I was dehydrated. I had also just finished removing a gas tank from a car. Someone told me later that gas fumes can give you hallucinations. Either that, or it opens portals to other dimensions. Story 51 years ago, I was working as a nurse at a hospital. I had this lovely elderly lady who suffered dementia. She was alone in a room at night. When I walked by, I heard her talking and popped in. She was alone, and she told me she was talking to her husband while pointing to an empty chair. I told her then tell him good night and go to sleep, which she did. 1 hour later, her family called. Her husband had passed away 1 hour before. I'm an atheist, but I still think of that. Story 52, I swear, there was an uncut or less cut version of Band of Brothers. There was more vomiting and stains in the Kirihi spaghetti trick, and Winters is called a Quaker in the D-Day Bridge tunnel ambush. I had it on DVD and even pirated it years later, and it never quite matched up the first time I saw it. Story 53, the Milky Way. Back during the first summer of COVID, I went out for a stroll at around 1 to 2 a.m. There's a river going through the town I was living in, and so I went down there to walk along it. An important thing here is that on the side of the river I was walking, there are only a few buildings that are inhabited, and those are with a bit of distance to the river itself. So I walked along the river, and there's a playground with one of those large swings, large enough for a half dozen kids to sit on. So, to enjoy the nice temperatures during the day, it was 35-40 out, and in my room, it wasn't much better since I had to be on the PC for most of it since I was taking an online C class. I went to lay on that swing. Somehow, between the road on the other side of the river being completely empty and almost no light coming from that side, the moon not being there, and the fact that none of the buildings on my side of the river being illuminated or blocked by trees for those that were, I was able to see our beautiful galaxy for a few minutes. Story 54, Ivory-billed woodpecker. I was 10 years old, home alone, in the piney wood around Caddo Lake. I saw the biggest woodpecker that I'd ever seen, and when I described it to a family friend, she pulled out her book of Audubon prints, and it looked exactly like that. Story 55, one other person saw this along with myself. Everyone in the karaoke bar we were at stopped moving at the exact same time the cheap stage lights stopped moving. Immediately after it happened, we looked at each other and said to one another, "Holy, did you just see that?" Story 56, when I was working at a warehouse for a shipping and storefront company named after a rainforest, I saw this owner. It wasn't an announced visit or anything. He was just there. He had a palpable aura of malice that ID never felt from anyone or anything before or since, like standing on a cliff or getting spotted by a wild predator. Like the only reason he doesn't kill you right now is because he doesn't feel like it. I hope his company gets either broken up under antitrust laws or turned into a nonprofit service. Working there was Story 57, am not from a particularly religious family. We didn't go to church every week or anything like that, but Mom insisted that we go to Mass every year on Christmas Eve. When I was 16 or so, I was bored out of my mind at Christmas Eve Mass and was just looking around the church for something to do. I looked at a candle and very clearly in my mind thought about it burning out, and the very next moment while I was still looking at it, it burned out. Story 58, I once saw the moon flicker flash into existence like a fluorescent light being switched on and talking one moment, dark empty sky. Next moment, a full moon flashing into existence. Story 59, I saw a kangaroo hopping through a cornfield in Indiana in the late 80s. My father never believed me, but there are kangaroo farms in Indiana, as well as a story about a pet kangaroo escaping in 2022, so I'm sticking with my story. Story 60, ideas float just above your head. You can put your own ideas up there, and the current will carry them away for someone else to catch, if you're properly tuned and you can snag ideas from the same stream. Story 61, when I was watching live coverage of the Columbine shooting, they went to a reporter on the phone, and somehow they got someone yelling bababooey, Howard Stern's penis. I've never seen it mentioned anywhere. Story 62, the night the U.S. announced the assassination of Osama bin Laden, I distinctly remember CNN, and specifically Wolf Blitzer announcing and giving a warning about what they were going to show, and for a split second showing the actual picture of the face of a very dead Osama, with 2 bullet holes. It was pulled off nearly the moment it was shown, and Wolf moved on without mentioning it again. But it was there and I saw it. The next day, I saw the new narrative of people demanding evidence and proof, and the government refusing to provide it, and saying the body was dumped at sea. Story 63, I was using my grandfather's hobby telescope in Seattle as a 9-year-old child. I swear I saw a disc like spacecraft in the sky, and it was darting around every few seconds, almost like teleportation. I ran to get my grandfather to show him, but it was gone when we got back. Story 64, when my daughter was little, I watched this children's animated movie that had a scary, hairy ghost that looked more like a dog than a ghost. The movie looked like the animation was done on separate paper pieces in stop motion, rather than drawn. The movie was in Finnish, and the ghost had a signature sounds where it went rin, murin, murin, rin, or sometimes swapping words around. Absolutely nobody remembers the movie, not even my daughter. Story 65, when I was still a student, I was doing my homework when I noticed that my geodreek, which was lying on my desk, was moving back and forth as if it was spinning on its axis. It was lying freely on the desk without being touched by anything else. I touched it, and the movement stopped and did not start again. Story 66, when I was 9 or 10, I was leaving the beach with my mom, and while unlocking my bike from a place overlooking the beach and the sea, I see a large sailboat far down at the sea, going down into the water vertically, nose down, completely gone in a few seconds. Of course, my mom was looking in another direction. Don't remember if I even told her. Edit. To add, this was a sunny day and the beach was packed. I don't know if anyone else saw it happening, and if any rescue operation commenced, but it happened so fast that I believe I may have been the only one that saw it. Especially considering my POV I had from these high up the sand dunes with a very wide view.